Sometimes, the circumstances surrounding certain events appear so bizarre and incredible that they raise serious doubts. Could this be an attempt to conceal a murder under the guise of an accident? The most challenging situation arises when even the closest relatives of the suspected perpetrator, their own children, disagree on what actually happened. Some sincerely believe in the suspect's innocence, while others harbor well-founded suspicions. Investigators must consider every detail and nuance to separate the truth from emotions and subjective beliefs. After all, the line between a fatal coincidence and a devious plan can be remarkably thin at times. The starting point of this convoluted story was the Sunday morning of July 13, 2016, in the affluent town of San Clemente, California, USA. Local residents considered this area ideal for a peaceful, measured life and the safe upbringing of children. However, the events of that day shattered their rosy notions of tranquility and comfort in their beloved streets. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, an agitated man who introduced himself as Dr. Susann Sills, a reproductive specialist, called the 911 emergency service. He reported that his wife, Susan, had fallen down the stairs and was lying unconscious, with no signs of life. Turning on the speakerphone, the man allowed the dispatcher to instruct him on providing first aid to the victim while paramedics were on their way. According to Scott, after resuscitation efforts, Susan reportedly showed some signs of life. However, when the medics arrived at the scene, they were surprised to find that Susann was already dead. Her lifeless body, covered in clothing, lay on the floor surrounded by rather strange objects: a stainless steel pot, a wallet, an empty medication container, and a scarf. It was particularly alarming that the pot stood unusually upright next to the corpse, as if deliberately placed there. But the paramedics' greatest concern was the marks on Susan's neck, which clearly resembled strangulation furrows from asphyxiation and could not have been the result of an accidental fall down the stairs. Scott explained that his wife had been about to walk the dogs, as she did every morning. He suggested that after the fall, the animals might have pulled on the ends of her scarf, causing suffocation. However, the police officers summoned to the scene had serious doubts about the plausibility of this version. It seemed unlikely to them that dogs could strangle a person in such a manner. Thus, they suspected that Susan had become the victim of a deliberate murder, and Scott might have been involved in her death. The investigators' primary task was to verify the husband's testimony. After all, a fall from a height of over 13 feet could theoretically lead to fatal injuries. However, it raised doubts that a 45-year-old woman in excellent physical shape and of sound mind, who regularly descended these stairs and knew the need for caution, could have fallen so carelessly. Moreover, numerous bruises and injuries were found on her body, on her face, back, arms, and legs. They clearly could not have been the result of a single fall. The police officers' suspicions only grew when they examined the objects lying near Susan's body. They did not match Scott's explanations at all. Furthermore, the man himself appeared remarkably calm and composed, despite the fact that his wife had just died in their home. Although he demonstrated a willingness to cooperate by allowing investigators to conduct a search and provide samples of his DNA, suspicions about his possible involvement did not disappear. Simultaneously, one of the officers began questioning the Sills children, 12-year-old twins Eric and Mary Catherine. The teenagers reported that the previous evening, their mother had suffered from a severe migraine attack, which happened to her periodically. Due to the unbearable pain, Susan had gone to rest in her daughter's dark room. Susan took a pot with her in case of nausea and a container of painkillers which she took during the attacks. According to the children, their parents had a warm, loving relationship and rarely argued. Both teenagers confirmed that an atmosphere of mutual understanding and support prevailed in the family. Thanks to the information obtained from the family members, the investigators were able to reconstruct the chronology of events on that fateful night. On Saturday evening, Susan, exhausted by pain, fell asleep in Mary Catherine's bed, as that room was the darkest and quietest in the house. At midnight, Scott went to check on his wife, but she was already fast asleep. Then the daughter decided to spend the night in her parents' bedroom. Before that, she left her mother a touching note on the door with wishes for a speedy recovery and words of love. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, Eric woke up to the loud voices of his parents coming from the adjacent room on the other side of the wall. The boy was not sure if anyone was fighting or arguing, as he did not hear any suspicious noises. Just a few minutes after this brief altercation, Scott entered the main bedroom where Mary Catherine was sleeping. In response to his daughter's question, the father replied that he had had a slight disagreement with her mother over some work email she had received. He assured the girl that there was no reason to worry, as the conflict was related solely to work matters. Despite the information provided by relatives, the police still had many doubts and open questions about this strange case. Could Susann have actually sustained such severe injuries from falling down the stairs? What did the marks on her neck mean, so similar to strangulation furrows? How did those incomprehensible objects end up near the body? And why was Scott behaving so unnaturally calmly and indifferently after the death of his beloved wife? The circumstances seemed highly suspicious, so the investigation was only beginning. Ahead, the detectives faced painstaking work to gather evidence and establish the truth in this convoluted tragedy. While questioning Scott, the police learned that during his nighttime visit to his sick wife at 4 o'clock, he found her working on a laptop. The man tried in vain to persuade Susann to put aside her work and rest, as she was feeling extremely unwell due to a migraine. However, Susann stubbornly ignored his warnings and refused to take care of her health. This is what led to an argument between the couple. After the conflict, all family members finally fell asleep. Waking up at 6:30 in the morning, Scott suggested to his daughter Mary Catherine that they go swimming in the pool. When the girl came out of her parents' bedroom, she saw a terrible picture. Her mother was lying at the bottom of the stairs with no signs of life. Susann had a long scarf around her neck, and a pot was lying nearby. Frightened, Mary Catherine screamed and called for her father. Scott continued to insist that his wife often used this scarf during migraine attacks, wrapping it around her head. Allegedly, it was their daughter's item. But could the pets, while playing, suddenly knock Susann off her feet and strangle her? Unless Susann fell in some incredibly unfortunate way, getting caught in the scarf that wrapped around her neck and killed her. However, all these assumptions seemed extremely dubious and implausible. Suspicious moments began to accumulate one after another. For example, if Susann was indeed carrying an empty pot that fell down the stairs with her, why did no one hear the clatter and wake up in the middle of the night? After all, the metal cookware would inevitably have created a loud noise, hitting the tiled floor and steps several times. Moreover, the very fact that Susann was wearing a warm scarf in the middle of summer seemed extremely odd. The police also began to suspect Scott himself. A fresh cut adorned his forehead, and a large bruise was on his arm. The man explained that he had received these injuries the day before while repairing a car in the garage. According to him, his son Eric was helping him with this. However, a serious contradiction arose here. The boy told investigators that on the day he and his father were working on the car, the latter had not sustained any injuries. Together they left the garage and entered the house, but Eric did not notice that Scott had been hurt in any way during this entire time. It also became known from the son that a few hours before the tragedy, he had seen his mother locking the dogs in a cage. Usually, after that, the animals would go to sleep. Eric could not understand why Susann had decided to walk them so early in the morning, especially in her weakened state. While searching the daughter's bedroom where the deceased had spent the night, forensic experts came across suspicious bloodstains. They were on the curtains, walls, and bedside table. However, Mary Catherine insisted that when her mother went to the room to rest, it was perfectly clean and there were no traces of blood. Scott claimed that these were old stains that had appeared last spring when he accidentally cut himself while changing the window mosquito net. However, these bloody imprints seemed quite fresh. Despite the suspiciousness of the findings, they proved insufficient to bring formal charges against Scott and arrest him. Susann's body was sent to the medical examiner's laboratory, and the police left the Sills house. The forensic medical examination was completed in 4 days. Unfortunately, it did not provide unambiguous answers. Numerous injuries were found on Susann's body, which could have been the result of either falling down the stairs or beating or strangulation. The most serious damage was a fracture of the spine at the base of the neck. According to the expert, This could have caused the appearance of the marks on the neck, which were initially mistaken for signs of strangulation. Also, ruptured blood vessels were found in the eyes of the deceased, a typical sign of asphyxia. However, the specialist was still unable to say with certainty whether these injuries were the result of an accident or direct evidence of a crime. A detailed analysis of all the traces found could take months. No one wanted to rush to conclusions, as the case was extremely confusing and controversial. Forensic experts focused on examining other evidence collected at the Sills home. First of all, the bloodstains in the room aroused suspicion. Not only were they sent for examination, but also other physical evidence. Susann's phone and laptop were also seized for investigation. The Sills family's neighbors had little to tell. The couple worked a lot and had almost no contact with those around them, so none of them had valuable information about the atmosphere within the family. Also, none of the neighbors had heard anything suspicious either at night or on the evening before the tragedy. Then the investigators decided to identify the circle of people with whom Susann had closely communicated through her medical contacts. This bore fruit. A witness was found who shed light on the real state of affairs between the couple. But the students taught by Scott described him as a cheerful and good-natured man who always showed up for classes in an elegant three-piece suit. Among them were those who had repeatedly met with Dr. Sills outside of classes. Everyone called him an extremely kind person. One girl even recounted how he had lent her money several times when she could not afford lunch or call a taxi to get home. Scott had always treated this student from a poor family with great understanding and compassion. It seemed that a brilliant future awaited Scott Sills from the very beginning. After graduating from school with flying colors, he first enrolled in law school and then in medical school. A sharp mind, determination, and diligence allowed him to become a successful specialist in the field of reproductive medicine. It was thanks to his profession that Scott met Susann. A few years before the tragic events, she had come to his medical center because she could not get pregnant by her first husband. At the time of meeting Scott Sills, Susann had just graduated from business school with a Master of Business Administration degree. She turned to the reproductive specialist with her problem, and he began to supervise her treatment. Gradually, a romantic relationship developed between the doctor and the patient. Soon, Susann filed for divorce from her first husband. Scott's new chosen one was a witty, cheerful, incredibly attractive woman, a faithful friend, and a wonderful life companion. When the man appeared with her at the next school reunion, everyone immediately noted what a beautiful couple they made. Therefore, the announcement of the upcoming wedding surprised no one. Moreover, Scott managed to help his beloved solve her health problems. Thanks to IVF, Susann became pregnant and gave birth to twins. Inspired by success, Susann was convinced that her husband was a true genius in his field, an expert who should help many women by working privately. Thanks to Susann's activity and skills, as well as Scott's expertise, the couple opened their own clinic in April 2015. In fact, the wife helped her husband build the business and ran it. She dealt with management tasks, while Scott acted as a doctor and performed all the procedures. Through this activity, the Sills family quickly became wealthy. They purchased a luxurious house in a prestigious area of the city, and Scott became passionate about collecting expensive cars. The family did not deny themselves anything. By that time, Dr. Sills had already become a celebrity in his field. He was recognized on the streets, as he had repeatedly appeared on television, published several books, and regularly contributed to professional publications. Scott was highly valued and trusted as one of the best experts in his field. It seemed that this man was working in an ideal tandem with his active, intelligent, supportive wife. However, shortly before the tragedy, disputes arose in the couple over a certain photo that appeared on Susann's social media page. After that, friends noticed tension in the couple's relationship. When the deceased's relatives and acquaintances learned about her death under strange circumstances, everyone believed that it was simply a horrible accident. But by the time the detectives began talking to witnesses, many had already managed to communicate with Scott. They were alarmed by the fact that the widower categorically refused to discuss this incident. This only heightened the investigators' suspicions. Now the detectives were almost certain that they were dealing with a murder, not an accident. During this time, forensic experts visited the Sills home several times. They were struck by the fact that Scott never showed remorse or grief, not at all resembling a widower devastated by loss. On the contrary, he behaved coldly and heartlessly. The man always spoke about Susann exclusively as a wonderful business partner, never once mentioning what a great wife and mother she had been. It seemed that he valued her only as a work colleague. Shortly after the tragedy, the staff at the Sills clinic was shocked by Scott's behavior. The very next morning after his wife was declared dead, he went to work as if nothing had happened. For him, this day was no different from any other. It appeared that the doctor was not at all concerned about what had happened. He did not even take a few days off to recover from the shock, although everyone expected this. The clinic manager and several other employees shared their observations with the police. Particularly valuable information was provided by a nurse who had assisted Scott in working with patients. According to her, the doctor avoided any conversations about his deceased wife. Moreover, he began to change his appearance quite quickly. If before Susann's death, Scott had the appearance of an ordinary balding man, then shortly after her death, he underwent a hair transplant. Now he had a thick head of hair, and his entire appearance began to transform. At the same time, Dr. Sills became more active on social media and began to carefully maintain his personal page. However, not a single word appeared there about how he was suffering without his wife. On the contrary, Scott took up visiting the gym, often dined at restaurants, and dressed stylishly. It seemed that he was looking for a new life partner and was not at all concerned about the fate of his deceased wife. And so it happened. Soon the man had a girlfriend with whom the relationship developed rapidly. Despite this, the police considered the evidence collected to be insufficient. It was necessary to summarize all the information and obtain new facts that would incriminate the suspect. In 2018, the results of an in-depth analysis arrived from the coroner's office. The forensic expert concluded that the cause of Susann's death was strangulation, which left post-mortem marks on her neck. Moreover, based on the results of the DNA test, it was established that the blood in Mary Catherine's room belonged to Susann and Scott. It followed that a fight had taken place between the spouses, as a result of which the man attacked his wife and killed her. On August 8, 2018, almost 2 years after Susann's death, detectives visited the Sills home and bluntly asked the doctor if he had killed his wife. Scott visibly became nervous, broke out in a sweat, and assumed a defensive stance. In response to the accusations, the man continued to deny everything. He explained the bloodstains in his daughter's room as an injury he had allegedly received when changing the mosquito net on the window. But then how did Susann's blood end up there? After all, Mary Catherine insisted that she had not seen any stains until the moment the police arrived at the scene and found her mother lifeless. Although the police were almost certain of the crime, they were in no hurry to bring charges against Scott. The man continued to insist on the version of an accident. To gather more evidence, the investigators decided to thoroughly examine the contents of the deceased's phone. They hoped to find information on social media that would help establish a motive for the murder. And indeed, they soon came across several alarming moments. As it turned out, Susann had repeatedly spoken very harshly about her husband. About 3 months before her death, she first wrote to a friend that she felt trapped in this relationship and wanted to divorce Scott. From then on, Susann periodically informed her husband that they were not suitable for each other. A month before the tragedy, Susann confessed to a close friend that her relationship with Scott was extremely tense. She was ready to leave him but claimed that her husband was holding her back because he did not want to lose the joint business. As Susann recounted, it was the scandalous photo that became a serious problem and provoked a new round of conflict in the couple. Turns out that Susann had published that photo after losing some kind of bet. However, Scott terribly disliked it. While browsing Dr. Sills' mobile phone, the police found a screenshot of the fateful photo taken on August 30th, 2016. Investigators suggested that the disclosure of this information could have been the motive for the murder. The man was driven by banal jealousy. It also emerged that the very next day after his wife's death, Scott tried to obtain a life insurance payout for her in the amount of $250,000. However, he was denied due to suspicion of murder. Only on April 25, 2019, almost 2.5 years after Susann's death, was Dr. Sills finally arrested on suspicion of committing this crime. The man was detained on his way to another operation and taken into custody with the right to post bail of $1 million. However, Scott immediately paid this amount and was released, awaiting trial. When information about Dr. Sills' problems with the law hit the press, a woman called the police and spoke about her affair with the suspect while Susann was still alive. They had met through social media, and at first, Scott seemed very attentive and caring to her. However, the man was soon forced to break off this connection. The new acquaintance provided investigators with a message she had received from Scott 2 weeks after Susann's death, when he was already looking for a girlfriend. In it, Dr. Sills suggested resuming their relationship, as he was now allegedly free. The police speculated that the motive for killing his wife could have been Scott's desire to get money, avoid dividing property due to a possible divorce, or simply get her out of the way, as Susann was interfering with his contacts with other women. By that time, Dr. Sills already had a lawyer. The latter insisted that the mentioned message was only an attempt by the grief-stricken father to find a new mother for his children. Finally, in November 2023, 7 years after Susann's death, Scott's case went to court. Although the suspect was against excessive publicity and clearly suffered from increased attention to his person throughout this entire period, cameras were allowed to be installed in the courtroom. In the years following the tragedy, the man had lost his medical license and seemed depressed. The prosecutor argued that on November 13, 2016, around 4 o'clock in the morning, when son Eric heard his parents arguing, the defendant attacked his wife in his daughter's room. He struck her numerous blows and then strangled her. After that, Scott staged an accident and went to bed, and in the morning he pretended not to know what had happened. Instead, Dr. Sills' lawyer presented a completely different version of events. It seemed that he intended to fight to the last. According to him, Susann woke up in the morning and tried to go down to the kitchen to take her pot there and start her usual chores. However, due to the influence of medications, migraines, and general weakness, Susann fell down the stairs and sustained injuries. The house dogs perceived this as a game, grabbed the ends of the scarf that was around the mistress's neck, and began to pull it in different directions. Thus, they inadvertently strangled Susann. Given the severity of the injuries sustained in the fall, death occurred very quickly. Unexpectedly, the deceased's daughter, Mary Catherine, spoke out in support of this version. The girl was now 19 years old, and she still maintained a very close relationship with her father. According to her, back then, 7 years ago, she really saw the dogs pulling on the ends of the scarf on her unconscious mother's neck when she came out of her room. However, at that moment, Mary Catherine simply did not understand what was happening. The girl explained that she had not told about this before because the investigators had not asked her. After all, at the time of Susann's tragic death, she was still a child and simply did not realize how important this information could be. Mary Catherine also added that they had removed the scarf from her mother's neck when providing first aid. That's why it was found away from the body. The defense conducted a DNA test of the scarf for the presence of dog traces, and the result was positive. In fact, even the toxicological examination partially confirmed the version of an accidental fall. A mixture of several sedatives and painkillers was found in Susann's blood. Because of this, her muscles were poorly controlled and remained too relaxed after sleep. In recent days, Susann had eaten little and suffered from weakness. All this could well have caused a loss of balance on the stairs, resulting in her breaking her neck and suffocating even without outside interference. After all, the injury was very severe and made breathing difficult. From the lawyer's point of view, the dogs only minimally contributed to the development of events. Allegedly, even if they had not grabbed the scarf, Susann could still have died. After all, no one heard the fall and came out to help call emergency services. However, the prosecutor continued to insist on the far-fetched nature of this version. According to him, Susann simply could not have fallen silently, since the pot would have loudly clanged. The prosecution was convinced that it was Scott who used the scarf to strangle his wife. However, The deceased's daughter claimed that her mother often wrapped herself in that scarf during migraine attacks, as it gave her peace. Then the prosecution went on the attack using its main trump card. It turns out that during the examinations of the house, experts did not find a single trace of Susann's DNA on the stairs. If she had really fallen, drops of blood or other biological traces would inevitably have remained on the 13-foot-tall staircase. But nothing of the kind was there. Thus, according to the prosecution's version, the man himself had brought his wife's body down, staging a fall. The prosecutor focused attention on the suspicious location of Susann's body. The 911 dispatcher had instructed Scott to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation on his wife on a flat surface. However, when the medics arrived at the couple's house, the deceased's leg was still on a step. So, the man had not provided her with assistance, but only pretended. The prosecutor emphasized that Scott had not moved his wife because he wanted to demonstrate the connection between her death and the stairs at any cost. Sills' lawyer also denied that the blood in the daughter's room had appeared as a result of a fight between the spouses. According to him, it could have gotten there by accident and not necessarily at the same time as the husband. Instead, the prosecution continued to insist that the defendant had a strong motive, as the photo published by Susann had aroused jealousy and anger in him. Eric's words that his father had not received serious injuries while repairing the car were also called into question. After all, we were talking about a teenager who, like his sister, could have missed something or gotten confused. Scott himself decided not to testify at the trial, which lasted 3 weeks. Finally, after the closing speeches of the prosecution and defense, the decision remained with the jury. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jurors concluded that 58-year-old Scott Sills was not guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. However, he was found guilty of second-degree murder. Now, the man who had given life to dozens of babies through his IVF practice was accused of killing his own wife and mother of his children. Scott was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 15 years. Upon hearing this verdict, Mary Catherine burst into tears right in the courtroom. The girl was confused, as she had now lost not only her mother but also her father. She insisted that it was a miscarriage of justice and intended to seek justice together with Scott's lawyer. But the sentence remained in force. Thus, the story of Susann Sills' death and the trial of her husband Scott once again proved that even seemingly perfect families can hide terrible secrets. This tragedy shook the quiet Californian town of San Clemente and was long remembered by all its residents. Despite all the doubts and contradictions, the jury found Dr. Sills guilty of second-degree murder. Now the successful reproductive specialist who had helped so many couples become parents will spend at least 15 years behind bars. And although some relatives, in particular daughter Mary Catherine, continue to believe in his innocence, the court's verdict remains in force. What lessons can we learn from this chilling story? First of all, it is worth remembering that even the most prosperous-looking relationships can turn out to be toxic and even dangerous. One should not ignore alarming signals and changes in a partner's behavior. This case also reminds us of the importance of thorough evidence gathering and careful attention to all details during an investigation. After all, sometimes the smallest details can be the key to uncovering the truth. If you are intrigued by this convoluted story and want to learn more about similar investigations, be sure to subscribe to the Denzel Crime Channel. Here you will find many stunning and instructive criminal cases that will make you think about the dark recesses of the human soul. Join our community, and together we will unravel new mysteries.